Um, First thing I'm required to do is to read this message concerning the Zoom meetings as pursuant to the City of Roanoke Emergency Ordinance adopted by the Roanoke Valley Transportation Planning Organization Policy Board on April 23rd, 2020, and 2020 Virginia General Assembly legislation H-29 enacted April 24, 2020. And in lieu of the December meeting, the RVTPO Policy Board will hold a virtual joint work session with the Transportation Technical Committee via Zoom on Thursday, December the 10th, 2020 at 1 p.m. Under the current state of emergency and until further notice, it's been deemed unsafe to assemble a quorum of a public body in one place. Any members of the public may view or participate in the meeting through the electronic means. Meeting details are listed on the second page of the agenda, and all materials made available to the members will be made available to the public at the same time by posting the RV ARC website. And Mr. Secretary, if we could go ahead and have roll call. I've got to slip off this one page here, and if you go ahead and do that, I'll be right back with you.
Okay. Mr. Johnson,
Present.
Mr. Clinton, Mr. Martin,
Here, sir.
Mr. Bestpitch,
Here.
Mr. Cobb,
Here.
Mr. Fidgelowski, Mr. North,
Here.
Mr. Radford,
Here.
Mayor Turk,
Here.
Mr. Jones, Mr. Lyles, Mr. Stovall,
Here.
Mr. King,
Here.
Mr. Price, Mr. Osborne, Mr. Sonacar.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you, sir. And that's everyone, including voting and non-voting. Do we need to do that?
I think Mr. Tripp, if he wants, he needs to probably call his roll, since it's a joint work session between the TPO and the Transportation Technical Committee.
I forgot that last time, didn't I? Mr. Tripp, would you like to go ahead and make your roll call for the TTC?
Mr. Martin, thank you, sir. I call this meeting of the TTC to order. Christina, would you be the one to call our roll?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mariel Fowler,
Here.
Peter Vollison, Cody Sexton,
Here.
Dan Brew, Megan Cronice,
Here.
Will Crawford, Chris Chittum, Mark Jamison,
Here.
Melinda Payne, Ben Tripp,
Here.
Anita McMillan, Nathan McClung, Dorian Allen, Richard Osborne, Liz Belcher,
Here.
Nathan Sanford, Dan Sonnenklar,
Here.
Michael Gray, and our non-voting member,
Here.
Kevin Jones. Okay, thanks, Michael. Kevin Jones. Okay, we have a quorum of the TTC.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just got a communication from Dr. Smoot that he was trying to access the meeting and was getting a message that said when the website says host has another meeting in progress. So if perhaps one of the technical folks could assist Dr. Smoot with making the connection, I'm going to email him the link I used, but I thought I wanted to alert the appropriate folks to maybe help him with that connection.
Okay. Well, thank you. Mine just all of my pictures went off here just a second ago too. That was probably my mistake though, but the next item on the meeting today was from Mr. Smoot. Do we want to wait just a minute and see what we can come up with, Wayne, or do we want to just go ahead?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we did have, before Dr. Smoot speaks, we did have, in your remarks, comments by Mr. Bestfitch about the Interstate 81 committee that met.
Yes, sir. I was getting ready to do that. Yeah. And if we're not on board, but after that, do we go to item 4 or just wait on Mr. Smoot?
Well, we've got the staff working on trying to help Dr. Smoot on. So let's go ahead with this one and we'll.
Okay, well, Bill Bestfitch was appointed by the Regional Commission to represent our region on the Interstate 81 Committee. The last committee meeting was held on October the 23rd, and Bill has provided a summary of the meeting in your agenda packet, but I'd like to ask Mr. Bestfitch if he had any general comments or any remarks he would like to make concerning that I-81 committee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't go into great detail because as you said, the notes that I typed up after the meeting are there on pages 3 through 5 of everybody's agenda. I did want to call attention to a couple of things that I think are particularly significant. At the bottom of the first page, the procurement of the design build contract is in progress, we were told, or in the process for exit 137 to 141 project, which we all know is very significant. And I don't know if Mr. King has any update of where that has gone since October 23, but the next meeting of this committee is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. So perhaps we'll get more information about that. The good news that I thought was that we're currently ahead of schedule on all the projects and expected to stay that way. Under rail planning, a lot of the improvements that have either been done recently in recent years or kind of in the works at this point are geared towards helping businesses connect to the rail, have spurs or whatever that they can connect to get to rail quickly. But there is a lot of emphasis on improving passenger rail as well. And I should have said at the beginning, Wendy Gudaitis, who's from up in northern Shenandoah Valley in the House of Delegates, was elected to chair the committee, and John Edwards was elected as the vice chair. So I think that bodes well for continuing to promote additional rail transportation in our region. And of course, the big focus right now is on the benefits to Virginia Tech and Radford to at least get the rail down into the New River Valley and at some point all the way down to Bristol. And the other thing that I think is very positive about that is that it probably means adding another train, not starting the train that we have now earlier in the morning in the New River Valley, but starting sometime later. That train will also come through Roanoke, of course, and give people another option. And perhaps set it up in a way that there's a train that people can come back to Roanoke earlier in the evening rather than not getting back till around 10 o'clock or so. When it comes to the funding, I think the biggest concern at this point is the fact that our fuel costs have stayed so low that the tax revenue is not necessarily keeping up with all the projections. And of course, as more and more people move to electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles, that is going to reduce the use of gasoline as well. So that's a little bit of a concern, I guess, but we'll just have to see how that plays out over the next few years. And as I said, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if Mr. King has anything additional he can add to any part of what I've said or knows of any updates further. Thank you.
Mr. King, do you have any remarks?
Well, I will apologize in that I was doing a little bit of IT support while that was going on and getting Dr. Smoot connected. So I missed a little bit, but I did catch the latter portion of what Mr. Bestfitch shared. And Yes, the revenues I think are going to be, that's going to be an ongoing challenge of anything that's gas tax revenue oriented, even after we get out of this economic slump. So I think that's just going to be an item for us to continue to track. I will say that I feel really good about the projects that are in the Roanoke Valley. We have, if you go look, you'll see that there's a lot larger number of projects in Stanton and Bristol districts, but the projects we have are so much larger in size. You know, ours are very focused on the widening efforts between, you know, the exit 150 and up to 118 up in Christiansburg, and that's our focus. So I feel really good with the progress we're making, and I think we're, you know, in terms of the big projects, I think we're out there in front, you know, in terms of the corridor as a whole. And of course, we've got the benefit of the Smart Scale project that's active now. So feel really good about all that. And also the information about rail was quite encouraging. And Dr. Smoot sits on the rail subcommittee of the CTB. So he may well be a good one to fill in any kind of rail questions that you might have. But unless you have a specific question, that would be the only thing I would highlight and kind of agree with what Mr. Bestfitch shared.
Well, Mr. King, one thing you might have missed while you were doing the technical assistance there is there any update on the process for the procurement of the design build contract for 137 to 141? On October 23, we were told that was in process at that time, and I didn't know if anything further had developed.
No, it has not come to fruition just yet. We have shortlisted the firms, but they're still in the selection process.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate the comments from both of you, and I see we have Mr. Smoot online now. Mr. Smoot, it's good to have you with us today. And you want to share some perspectives on transportation planning and construction during this COVID pandemic. So we'll just turn it over to you, and looking forward to hearing your comments.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to visit with you today. I appreciate the work that you all do, which I hear from time to time in the CTB meetings, and also, of course, in my ongoing conversations with Ken King. I jotted down several notes, and if I get to going on too long, tell me it's time to quit, and I'll be glad to do so. But just several things that are going on that I think will be of interest. Bill talked about the passenger rail initiative, and I think we're very fortunate because the increased service to Roanoke and then on also to the New River Valley has now been included by the state in their larger proposal they are making to Norfolk Southern to address improved service all along the corridor from Northern Virginia down through Charlottesville, Lynchburg, Roanoke, and then on to the New River Valley. And that they have put together a major comprehensive proposal to do this, something like, though not as large as the one that was announced almost exactly a year ago with CSX on the Washington to Richmond corridor, then on to North Carolina. So that conversation is ongoing, and I suspect we will be hearing something about that sooner than later. So that's encouraging. We had a 7-hour plus Commonwealth Transportation Board meeting yesterday by Zoom, which now sets my record for length of Zoom meetings. But we covered a number of things, and much of the discussion was on being able to keep current projects moving despite the impact that COVID is having on the state budget. And I think the leadership within the Commonwealth Transportation Board, Shannon Valentine, as you all know, is the secretary, in working with the administration, they have come up with a way to keep all approved projects moving forward. And that is not the case in most states, by the way. But basically what they're doing is borrowing, if you will, from monies that have been set aside for future projects in order to move these projects forward, with the notion being that, and hopefully, when things get back to a more normal pace, that then the money that's being used now to keep projects moving can be paid back, if you will, to the other projects that are yet to come. So I think that's all very positive. There are several projects in our region, in addition to the I-81 project, that are moving along. And Ken knows a lot more about these than I do, but the S curve at Montvale, or just east of Montvale on 460, is under construction. The 419-581 intersection project continues to be in the early planning stages, and that one's is several years down the road from coming to fruition, but it is moving along. Also, consideration of how traffic along Route 460 eastbound coming out of Roanoke might be improved is going along. Ken can tell you, if you want to hear about the work that's upcoming along the 220 corridor between Roanoke and Martinsville to improve the flow of traffic along that corridor. I do want to alert you and ask your assistance, if you concur, that we need to continue to lift up the 220 corridor, the entire corridor, all the way from North Carolina to where it goes into 64 up in Clifton Forge, as critical to our entire region, because it is. And the Southern Connector project, which would start at the North Carolina line and come up to the 220-58 line around Martinsville, is a project that has been approved. It needs funding, but that would be a great enhancement to improving the flow of traffic to and from Roanoke Valley to the south, or coming from the south to the Roanoke Valley. I want to mention something that I think deserves our attention and our concern. And where this is going is unknown at this time, but there are those in the legislature who want Virginia to become a signatory to the Northeast States Carbon Pact. Now, reducing carbon certainly is a laudatory goal. But if you examine what's being looked at, it hasn't yet been done. Among other things, it would increase the gasoline tax by about 34 cents a gallon.
Good.
Which in and of itself, at first blush, you say, well, maybe that'll help address some of these funding needs. Well, let me tell you that the Carbon Pact also directs that much of the increased gasoline tax would go to mass transit rather than building or maintaining existing highways. The Carbon Pact also, in some states, has led to gas rationing in order to meet the goal. And I think this deserves our attention very carefully in talking with legislators particularly, because this will not bear great benefit to the less urban areas of the state, of which we are one in the sense of this thing. I also lift up to your attention testimony that was presented at the November Commonwealth Transportation Board by Tripp Pollard, who heads the Southern Environmental Law Center, in which he urged the Commonwealth Transportation Board to reorient its transportation planning to mass transit for the most part, and to not invest in highway improvements or additions, except in those parts of the state where high density development, a la Northern Virginia, has already occurred. And his view is that if we build new roads or improve existing roads where we have high density development, then we will reduce carbon because people won't have to drive as much. Now, folks, that is bad news for places like Roanoke and most of the state, frankly, once you get out of Northern Virginia. And I lift this up as a great concern. Moving on to perhaps more positive things, I want to express appreciation to our highway workers who, for the very large part, have not worked from home, who are out on the job every day, and there are a lot of projects moving along. A bridge on the road, the back way from where I live up in Montgomery County to Roanoke, which has been there since 1926 and was about to fall in, is just finished being replaced. And there are projects like that all over our region. So we need, along with the many others who continue to meet critical needs during this COVID situation, to recognize our highway department workers who are out there every day trying to get along with projects. I'm going to stop at this point, and if at any point in the meeting you want to ask some questions, I'll be glad to try to respond to them.
How's the best way to fight this thing? Just contact our legislators?
It is, and the executive branch.
Mr. Chairman, I had a question for Dr. Smoot.
Yes, sir.
I was just curious. You mentioned a number of things about legislation and implications. I saw Hampton Roads has in their legislative packet a request to the General Assembly to add in smart scale a factor, if you mind, or criteria that deals with resiliency. And that has to do, of course, they have lots of flooding and lots of other issues related to being coastal. I don't know what that would mean to our area, or and then their point was that lots of these resiliency kinds of projects related to transportation don't cost much. But I didn't know. Maybe Mr. King knows, has heard of that legislative.
Well,
agenda.
I'll say just a word about it, and then hand it off to Ken. Certainly, sea level rise is of concern to the eastern parts of the state. Smart scale is important, but let's look at the numbers just a minute. In the current smart scale program, in round numbers, $800 and some million. Half of that is allocated at the state level, and half of that is allocated at the district level, and there are 9 or 10 districts, and Salem district in round numbers accounts for about 10% of the state road mileage or various measures so it tends to get, again in round numbers, about 10% of the pot of money. So that means there's only, again in round numbers, $440 million at the state level available to be allocated. Well, that's one project. Could be one project for the entire state.
Right.
So I don't know. While smart scale is certainly important, I'm afraid that unless some additional sources of revenue are found, that particularly our region is unlikely to receive any major funding or major project funding out of smart scale. I don't like that, but it's the way it is.
Thank you.
Well, any questions from anybody that's on the board for Mr. Smoot? Well, if not, then,
Mr. Chair,
yes.
Dr. Smoot, I have a question concerning Smart Scale. When will we get a preliminary view of the Smart Scale submissions that were made this year? Is that going to occur sometime in January or February?
Yeah, Phil, my understanding is that it will be January to February. Yes. There was a passing reference made to that at the CTB meeting yesterday.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Smoot?
One question on the rail side concerning increasing service through the Roanoke to the New River Valley. It's good news to hear that that's progressing. The question concerns the Long Bridge. At one time, I'd heard that that was going to hold up any expansion of passenger rail service. Is that still true, or has that been relaxed since this agreement's in process with Norfolk Southern?
Phil, the funding for the Long Bridge project was included in last year's announcement with CSX. Now it will take, 7 to 8 years for that thing to be finished and opened. The approvals that are necessary to make it work, which include Washington government and all kinds of federal agencies, are all moving along, surprisingly. And our senators have been helpful in getting some legislation to make it happen as well. But as you are saying, the capacity of Long Bridge at certain times during any given day is at a peak. The railroad has expressed a willingness to modestly increase traffic on Long Bridge until the new bridge is built, and then the issue goes away. So I do know that, as Bill made reference to, 2 trains in each direction to and from Roanoke and then on to the New River Valley are included in this proposal that Norfolk Southern is at last seriously considering. And I further learned yesterday that the way that is likely to work is that the service to and from Roanoke going to or from the north is believed could start within 2 years. So in addition to that early morning train we have now going north, there would probably be an early afternoon train going north. And in addition to the one that now gets sent around 10 p.m. coming from the north, there would probably be one that would get in at very early afternoon. And then by 2025, if this negotiation with Norfolk Southern is successful, both of those trains will go on to Christiansburg.
Good news. Thank you very much.
All right. Any other questions? Remarks? Okay. If not, Mr. Smoot, thank you for
Thank you.
sharing that with us. We appreciate that. Then we'll go to our next agenda item number 4, update on Vision 2045, Roanoke Valley Transportation Plan. And I believe Miss Christina Finch is going to take this one.
Mr. Martin, yes, I will start the presentation. Good afternoon to all of the board members and to all of the technical committee members. It is a beautiful day outside in Roanoke.
Oh, he is down here too.
All right. Are you able to see the presentation?
Yes.
There we go. All right, so I am happy to provide you with an update today on the Vision 2045 Roanoke Valley Transportation Plan. I want to just play off of some of the remarks that Dr. Smoot and Mr. Bestpitch had been sharing about transportation progress. It's hard to believe that it's already been 3 years since the adoption of our last long-range transportation plan, and certainly we've been making great strides to improve our multimodal transportation network. think most exciting for many people has been that we have a dedicated funding source on I-81. And although many past plans and programs had listed I-81 as an 8-lane project, widening I-81 to 6 lanes certainly aims to improve travel time reliability for freight and passenger travel along this important interstate corridor. And we're really looking forward to seeing those projects unfold over the next several years. For many years, widening Orange Avenue east to 6 lanes was also another project that was on the books. And after several unsuccessful rounds of smart scale, other solutions have been studied as outlined in the Route 460 Operation Improvement Study. And funding is being sought via the current round of smart scale. And even though we don't know if those projects submitted will be successful in securing funding at this time, by considering other solutions to address the needs of Route 460 East, we now know there are other ways to improve traffic flow and reduce vehicle congestion in the corridor. Operating out of the oldest transit station in the Commonwealth and with plans to build a new transit hub in the center of our region, Valley Metro and the City of Roanoke are well on their way to laying the foundation for essential regional transportation services that will enable citizens to access key destinations for many decades to come. And a great amount of time has been and is being spent by many of our regional and local technical staff on working to make our region safer and more comfortable for biking and walking, correcting poor planning practices that did not provide safe accommodations in the past, and where close proximity between destinations logically lends itself to non-motorized transportation. So we're making a lot of progress, and as we look to the future, our ongoing successes give us confidence that we'll continue to see positive improvements that serve the needs of our community. So there's a lot to think about. How will or might people and goods be traveling in the year 2045? What types of public investment will be required to support people and businesses as they go about their daily activities? What are the transportation challenges that people and businesses are experiencing today that we have the power to solve? At the Regional Transportation Summit, recently hosted by the airport, it was stated that maybe our region should have a regional transportation master plan. Upon hearing that comment, I realized that some of our community leaders don't realize that we already have one, and that the value of a metropolitan transportation plan, as it's referenced in federal code, a long-range plan, or any number of names to which this document is referred, is not understood by some folks. So as we refer to it here at the RVTPO, the Vision 2045 Roanoke Valley Transportation Plan is the Roanoke Valley's guiding document for transportation policy, planning, and desired investments in our region. Transportation is different modes working as a system for the safe, efficient movement of people and goods. And if there are transportation needs to be recognized and addressed, this is the place to do that. So last year, the policy board approved the same planning boundary as what was used in the 2040 plan. What is shown in pink on the map here is our current urbanized area, as was defined through the 2010 census. The outline in blue shows the area that we are planning to be urbanized by the year 2045. And as we get into the discussion of transportation needs, they are not limited to what is within the blue boundary, but also consider needs getting to and from the Roanoke Valley. So this is the schedule, which I had also shared with you a few months ago. So just a reminder on how we're progressing through developing this plan. We have been, since the summer, working on gathering information on where we've been and where we are currently. We've been identifying current and perceived future needs, most notably through a citizen survey. And we've also been reflecting on where we've been and where we are today. And that's where we are now in December. The second row of boxes and then the following row outline the steps that we'll be taking from here, setting forth vision and goals, considering factors that we need to be thinking of for the future, and then confirming objectives and performance measures, We'll be exploring solutions to meet the problems of today and the needs of the future. And then looking at what are those projects that will best address the needs within the fiscal constraint of the plan, and then finalizing the plan as early as spring of 2022. But because we're on a 5-year update, it's actually not finally due really until the fall of 2022. But if we can, we'll push that up earlier. So we, the TPO staff, have been combing through many sources, and as we read them, it's been challenging to clarify what exactly are transportation needs. So it's been helpful to look to some national resources to provide that clarity. Anytime a transportation project is pursued, its purpose and need must be stated. So having that initial understanding now about what to address and why it's important. So when we get to the end of this planning process and are identifying the investments that will be pursued with limited staff time and public dollars, we will be able to tell our citizens why certain issues are being worked on and others are not. So AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, has a document related specifically to defining purpose and need and determining the range of alternatives for transportation projects. In it, they state that a project need will describe the problems that the proposed action is intended to address, and to the extent possible, explain the underlying causes of those problems. The need provides a factual foundation for the project's purpose, which describes the fundamental reasons why the project is being proposed, expressed as a desired transportation outcome. Similarly, the Federal Transit Administration says the purpose and need should be a statement of a transportation problem, not a specific solution. It should be specific enough to generate alternatives that may potentially yield real solutions to the problem at hand. That only one alternative solution may indicate a purpose and need. If that's the case, then it's too narrowly defined. It should focus on the primary transportation challenges and serve as the cornerstone for development and evaluation of alternatives. So what is the need? As we've been sifting through all of the information, what we've come up with is it's basically a problem or a deficiency impacting the safe, efficient movement of people or goods, or the problems that people or businesses experience getting to where they are going or moving what they are selling and receiving. The TTC had indicated that it would be valuable as part of the long-range plan process to obtain public input on transportation needs, and then again at the end of the process when we have a draft plan. So with limited options due to the pandemic, we virtually engaged citizens through an online survey. We also looked back at public input received on previous TPO surveys and reviewed previous local and regional plans and studies. We also reviewed the needs identified through the statewide VTrans process, though ultimately our hope is that if there are needs identified through this, our VTPO long-range plan process, that are not currently reflected in VTrans, that future statewide needs assessments will incorporate and better reflect our region's needs. So to go over VTrans a little bit, VTrans classifies needs based on a scale, so corridors of statewide significance, regional networks, urban development areas. The ones that are most relevant to the regional needs assessment are those needs that have been identified through data-driven sources as listed on the screen. VTrans needs also include many aspirations for certain types of improvements, because including them broadly makes related projects automatically eligible in the smart scale system. So things like on-street parking or sidewalks are identified as VTrans needs on just about every street in our region. In this sense, VTrans aspirational needs are more appropriately referred to as possible solutions. Okay. So we have many local and regional plans that are not constrained by budgets the way that this long-range plan considers fiscal constraint. And some of these plans outline very robust future visions of how we'd love particular elements of the transportation network fulfilled. We've gone through 33 plans and studies, and some do a really good job of explaining the transportation needs, whereas others mainly state what solution is being recommended. And I'd like to hand it over now to Rachel to talk a little bit more about the public input.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Our public input for this effort is, as Christina mentioned, coming from two major sources, one of which is actually 9 sources. These are 9 surveys that we have done since Vision 2040, our last long range plan. These were surveys done for amendments to the long range plan itself, amendments to the transportation improvement program, and other purposes like our congestion management process update. Our other source of public input is the survey that just wrapped up last month that's specifically for this effort. And next slide. So let me talk briefly about the surveys since Vision 2040, these 9 surveys. In each survey, we provided a general comment box, and a lot of them we also asked, is there any other projects you'd like to suggest? And so we got a lot of comments that weren't relevant to the topic of the survey. And this was on purpose. We were hoping to gather information that we could use in this current process. So we got almost 600 comments that weren't relevant to the topic of the survey that we got the comment on. Out of these comments, there were 284 projects suggested. A lot of those are duplicates, and 111 transportation needs identified. So I included a couple of graphs because I wanted to show how our public participation has really radically changed over the last several months, the last couple of years. We didn't used to offer a survey every time we had a public comment opportunity. And now we are doing that almost every time. So when we didn't offer a survey, we just announced we're accepting public comment on this document or on this issue. We would get maybe 2 comments, maybe 0, not very many. When we offer a survey, we get a lot of comments. In addition to people taking the survey and, selecting the answer options. So this upper left graph shows that our participation has been climbing upwards. There's obviously some surveys that are very popular. Anything to do with the interstate gets a lot of responses. And the lower right-hand graph shows that the number of comments we're receiving has actually been climbing exponentially because that's a logarithmic scale on that graph. Next slide. So this is the survey, and I'll just take you through it very briefly. The welcome screen gives information about the survey. Hopefully all of you took the survey, so you're already familiar with it. In the transportation needs activity, participants could drag the need above that line and put it in order of importance. Okay, next slide. So the next screen then was this budget allocation activity where people could drop coins into the different buckets. And we're going to save that information. We have a lot of data from both of all those 9 previous surveys plus this survey. We have a lot of data to analyze, but we're going to save that budget allocation data until a later stage in this process. The one we were very interested in then is the map marker screen where participants could drag and drop a marker onto the map, and the marker could be a safety, access, traffic, or maintenance marker. And then they would answer a question or they could leave a comment. So we have a lot of data from that screen. Next slide. And then we ask for some demographic information. Next slide. So we received 486 participants, which makes this one of our larger surveys, and they dropped over 1,000 markers on the map. We promoted it through online. We did promote it through a postcard that had a link and a QR code, and we gave that postcard out along with a brochure called Guide to Getting Around Roanoke Valley. These postcards were distributed through Radar. Downtown Roanoke Inc. put them in their residents' mailboxes. The Workforce Development gave them away. Various partners around the valley helped us distribute those postcards. And of course, we were doing the survey through October and November, so there wasn't a lot of in-person, survey promotion, but we were able to attend the Melrose Fall Festival, which they had, safe and socially distanced and all. And we had an iPad available there. So that was the one opportunity that people without their own internet or mobile device or computer access could take the survey. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a bit about the demographic data that we got. Our distribution, this is the second survey that we have gotten at least one response from every zip code that's in the RVTPO boundary. Next slide. But just one response, of course, wouldn't necessarily tell us much if that has a large population relative to the region. So we compared the response that we got to the proportion of the population for each zip code. And we're now within 5% for all the zip codes. So that's another first for our surveys. We certainly have continuously struggled with 24012, which is downtown Roanoke, and 24017, which is northwest Roanoke, but we are definitely making an improvement in the response rates from all those zip codes. Next slide. We asked a couple demographic questions that we haven't asked before: household income and age. 5% of our participants said their household income is less than $20,000 a year. Our region has a poverty rate of about 12%, so that's an area that we could focus on in future surveys. For age, adults 25 to 64 years old, we got response rates that are similar to the proportion of the population, but we were low on young adults and senior citizens. We have asked race ethnicity on most of our surveys, and this has been a difficult one to make progress on, but we have steadily made very slow progress on it. So you could see that our response rate for Black or African American was less than 5%, while our population is 14% Black or African American. So we obviously have a long ways to go there. We were also low for our Hispanic Latino. But this doesn't tell the whole picture, because in this survey, 13 individuals identified as Black or African American, and that might not seem like a lot, but that is a record for us. So we're steadily increasing the absolute number of people who do check that box. And we, certainly continue to work on that, and we're thinking about offering surveys in Spanish language and doing some outreach to that population as well. Next slide. So that's the demographics. Where our surveys are certainly doing better, but they're not yet representative of the region. So we should, just take that into consideration, that we may not really be hearing from everyone quite yet. In the priority ranking screen, citizens ranked safety highest and then traffic congestion. And this is consistent with what we've seen in other surveys. Now, some of these need areas we realized are more, it's an individual doesn't have an environment need typically, or an economy need. So in the next slide please, that we use these 4 categories for the map marker activity: safety, traffic congestion, access, and then system preservation, which we call maintenance for this survey. Next slide. So there's a lot of dots on the map. And these are color coded by which category. And obviously they're so clustered that it's hard to see the dots. Next slide. So separating them out some, this is those safety dots from the previous slide, but now they're like a pale gray. You can barely see, but the reason they're pale gray is because otherwise they're so thick in places that they obscure the data underneath, which is the 5-year crashes from the past 5 years, with the fatalities and serious injuries being the big dark and bright red blobs. The stars are the top crash locations. So this might not be a crash location where a fatality occurred, but it's a place where there's been a serious injury crash or a fatality crash somewhat consistently over the past 5 years. Next slide. And this is a similar one where I have the traffic dots from the map overlaid on the routes from the congestion management process, which we just updated a few months ago. The orange lines were the priority corridors that were identified based on that real-time data coming from GPS-equipped vehicles and smartphones. And the yellow lines were corridors identified from the public input. So we definitely see some consistency between what the public was saying then and what they're saying now. And then the green lines are the roads for which we have data. So there are some roads that we don't have data for, and that's where this public input is particularly valuable. Next slide. And then these are the access dots. A lot of the access issues mentioned referred to a particular mode, such as transit or bike and ped, but there were also some access needs that were talking about motor vehicles. Next slide. And this is the maintenance markers that people dropped on the map. These were largely on local roads, and so they're not really on the regional network. And I think that may be the last one, and I'll turn it back to Christina.
All right, thanks, Rachel. So for our next steps, we are going to be finishing our ArcGIS online maps. The maps that Rachel was just showing mainly showed the citizen input that we've received. So we want to have all of our sources available so that folks can toggle them on and off for each of the 4 need categories. We'll be providing this, our goal is next week for review. So technical committee and consultant review, and we're asking for feedback by January 15th. We'll also be seeking an OIP grant for technical assistance with establishing a performance-based process. We're going to be going into some new ground with this long-range plan process that we haven't experienced before. So we'll be seeking the OIP grant to help build that process. And then I also wanted to introduce to you today our consultant that we have hired to help us with this long-range plan process right now. And they will be coordinating with our travel demand developers, also looking at future issues and working with our technical committee to draft vision, goals, objectives, and look at prioritizing all of those transportation needs that we've been collecting through all the previous surveys and plans and citizen survey. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you the team from Cambridge Systematics. We have with us Rich Denbo and David Jackson, and I will turn it over to them to share with you a little bit about how they're going to be helping us in the next few steps.
Great, thank you, Christina. My name is Rich Denbo. I'm with Cambridge Systematics. I'm in our Raleigh office. We have a few offices around the country, but I'm in North Carolina, so next door to Virginia. And we've done a lot of work with MPOs and state DOTs on long-range planning and several other types of studies. And we're very excited for this opportunity. We appreciate the opportunity to work with you all and are really looking forward to working with the staff on this effort. So we have a couple other team members, EPR and Foursquare Integrated Transportation Planning as well, and you'll probably be seeing them throughout the process. So I've got just a couple slides here to talk about at a kind of a high level our approach. Christina talked about the role we're going to play as the consultant helping out staff. And both her and Rachel spent a lot of time talking about the needs that are driving this process. So this slide here is a high level framework on taking those needs and really turning them into a framework and a decision mechanism for identifying projects and solutions and then projects. So it really starts with these needs. I think you've probably seen this graphic before in some of your discussions, but it really starts with the needs that we just discussed, and then moves on to putting some priorities around those needs. Obviously, there are many more needs than we have funding for, so we have to prioritize those needs, and that can be at the local level, or the broader regional level, or both. So it's really looking at ways to pull the priorities out of there and what those needs are. And then establish some goals and objectives based on those needs, not just now, currently, but what those needs might be in the future as well. And then that leads to looking at solutions, which are the strategies to address those priority needs. And that's a process that we will go through between now and the summer, which then leads to projects, the specific improvements. And those can be specific projects or projects that are part of broader solutions. And then after that's done, there's sort of a look back on how did those projects address the needs that we identified. So this is a circular process, and that's the reason MPOs have to do long-range plans every 4 or 5 years, because there's this ongoing process of looking at needs and addressing needs. Next slide, please, Christina. So when it comes down to prioritizing those needs, we look at quite a few things. We looked at all the plans and everything that was just covered by Christina and Rachel. That's sort of what guides us in the needs. And that leads to some goals for the transportation network and the system. What do we want the transportation network to do for us? What are our broad goals at a high level? And those needs guide us to defining and reaching those goals. The next step is to look at objectives for reaching those goals. Those are really the steps on how we're going to get there. How do we actually accomplish those goals? And to do that, we use performance measures. So we're in this new phase of transportation planning nationwide. There are requirements in place now that weren't there the last time the MPO did a long-range plan. These are new as of about a year or two ago. So all MPOs across the country are now in this performance-based planning and programming approach where performance and data drive a lot of the decision-making. So we have performance measures, which are ways to measure whether objectives and goals are being met. And those help us to make the decisions we need to make about which projects to select. And then we have to track those performance measures and the changes that the projects make in performance of the overall transportation system, and set targets for whether for where we want to be at certain points in the future for performance. So we incorporate all of that. Of course, driving this are the existing trends and the emerging trends, which we anticipate for the future, 20 or 25 years down the road. So all that goes into prioritizing the needs and coming up with solutions. And next slide, please. And because we're going to be talking about performance-based planning and programming quite a bit over the course of developing the RTP, there are some definitions for what each of these terms mean at a broad level. And you'll probably hear us talking quite a bit about these over the next few months and over the next year. So I mentioned the goals. The goals are these sort of broad statements that describe an end state for the system. And an example of that is to provide a safe and secure transportation system for all modes. That's a very broad statement. That's a very laudable goal. The next step is to come up with objectives under that goal. So those are a little more specific. They're also measurable, and they support achievement of a goal. So an example of that is to reduce the number and rate of motorized fatalities and serious injuries. Goals often have more than one objective underneath them. They can have 2 or 3 to help ensure you're meeting that goal in different ways. But the next step after objectives is to have performance measures. So the objectives are supposed to be measurable. The measures are what we actually look at to find out if we're making progress towards meeting those goals. So an example of a performance measure is the total number of fatalities or total number of serious injuries. And there will probably be more than 1 or 2 measures for each objective and definitely for each goal. So this is the new paradigm for transportation planning that MPOs are required to do. States are also required to do, and there are already defined federal performance measures that we'll be looking at. But the MPO also has the opportunity to develop their own performance measures throughout this process. So I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of where we're going, and from all the discussion about needs to how we're looking at these needs and defining and prioritizing the needs and defining objectives and measures to reach the long-range transportation plan that we're putting together. So I look forward, as I mentioned, I look forward to working with everybody, and we're very pleased to be here and excited about undertaking this long-range plan.
Thank you, Rich. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes our update on the long-range plan.
Okay, does anyone on the board have any questions for Sabrina or, Christina? Did it again, Christina, I'm
That
sorry.
is my name when I come to board meetings.
I'm going to change it, I'm sorry. Or for Mr. Denbo, do you have any questions for them? Is Dr. Smoot off of the conference yet?
No, I'm still here.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for him?
Mr. Chairman, this is Bill Bestfitch. I wanted to ask Christina if she's had an opportunity to share our current plan with some of the folks who are involved in putting together that transportation summit that said they thought we needed to have one.
I have not, but we will certainly, I'll talk with Wayne and we'll look into that.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
if I might, just very quickly, two thoughts.
Yes, sir.
One is that in order to be competitive for smart scale funding, the area of the project needs to be identified on the VTrans list of projects. So just keep in mind as we go through this, that to be sure that whatever projects may come out of this are in areas that have been identified on the VTrans list that is updated periodically by the state. And Ken King can give a lot more information about that than I can. The second thing, Christina talked about these surveys. And let me just share that last fall, we had a survey, we being VDOT, for the Southern Connector project in Henry County. And we got about 500 responses. And that was all well and good until someone noticed that 220 some of them all came from the same website or email address. So we need to be very careful when we do surveys that we're not getting manipulated by responders of whatever persuasion they may have on the project. And that's something that Christina and Rachel, I hope you all will give some attention to and discuss at the state level. I know there's some work going on at the state level to try to eliminate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Smoot. And I would like to thank Dr. Smoot and Rich Denbo for being on the meeting with us today and giving us the information that you have.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I wasn't sure when would be the right time to ask this, if there is in fact a right time, but in listening to all of this, it's been very interesting, and we're looking at things at a very high level now, which is good. I was curious that unless I missed it in the first couple of minutes before I signed on, in all of this, I never heard any mention of I-73 or the transfer station down in Ellett Valley, which have been projects that we have talked about and which I think to some degree are still theoretically under consideration. And I was just curious if there is anything to update on those from anyone who, from either Dr. Smoot or anyone else?
I am not aware of any discussion or consideration of I-73 at the state level. It has not been discussed in CTB for the time I've been there, which is 2.5 years. Upgrading 220 seems a more realistic approach to improving traffic along that corridor because of both environmental issues associated with I-73 and funding. Now, one thing we should all watch though is that if there is a major federal infrastructure bill coming out of Congress in the next year or two, what's feasible could change quickly. So we need to be sensitive to that. But in the absence of something like that, I don't see I-73 picking up traction.
Okay, thank you, sir. Lee, any other questions?
Well, I guess I just wonder, does that mean it's just going to stop in North Carolina and West Virginia and not go through Virginia, or are they going to reroute it? There is as far as I know, there is a federal I-73. They've done a pretty good job of building it in North Carolina. So I'm not being facetious. I realize that it's not a priority here, and it has complications routing it through the Roanoke Valley. And so I guess my question is, will it end up eventually going somewhere else? Or do we have any reason to want to try to change that?
Yeah.
King, you have any?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I might jump in and try to help with a little bit of that. So, so really, Lee, the first major challenge that I-73 has as it comes into Virginia from North Carolina is really right there in the southern part of Henry County.
Right.
Because, the approved alignment takes it to the east. It goes on the east side of Martinsville, and would build, a bypass, if you will, to the east. And I think that was largely due some interests of Danville, having that connection be a little closer. So that was an influence back in the day. But the environmental agencies have always spoken opposition to that because of the impacts that it has on streams in that area. In particular, after you get north of 58, that eastern side around Martinsville, there's a lot of perennial stream impacts. There's also some environmental justice challenges. There's just numerous hurdles from an environmental perspective. And I think really it was after the challenge that we ran into on 460, where we knew we had some environmental concerns and the department had moved forward with expenditures. And then eventually the permitting agencies dug their heels in and said, we're not going to permit this US 460 improvement that was proposed. And if you recall, there was a lot of expenditure that had been made with the thought that we were going to, at some point that environmental hurdle would be, overcome. And then it was the realization that was not feasible. The environmental agencies were not going to permit it. And so then the influence of that has certainly rung a lot louder in the process. So this on record comments from the Corps and others of concerns of environmental impacts has got a much greater influence over that future of I-73. So to resolve the route, you would then have to reopen a location study, which is usually a 4+ year endeavor with multiple millions of dollars. And when you don't have a foreseeable funding plan to be able to actually fund the route that would come out of that process, there's been no appetite to reopen the entire study alignment to address that overall issue. As opposed to that, what has happened is, as Dr. Smoot said, is and some other states have taken this approach as well, is less of a focus on truly trying to achieve fully interstate right out of the gate, but trying to make corridor arterial type improvements. And that's really where the Martinsville Southern Connector sort of back up and take a whole different approach. It's not I-73, it's a separate study. It's got a separate purpose and need, but it was to try to achieve a limited access facility from the state line to 58. And as you may have been updated through time, that there was a route analysis that was looked at, and it actually goes to the west of the existing 220 corridor and ties in, but would put in place then, if built, would put in place from the state line all the way to Bassett Forks, Dodge's store there. You would have basically a limited access facility through that first portion, and that was identified as sort of the overall objective of trying to make improvements to the 220 corridor. But the reference to I-73 and it being under the overall program of I-73 is not, it's not a part of that, but it is a part of the overall corridor improvements. And I think, Lee, that's probably more fruitful in the years ahead to be looking at it in those more pragmatic. Even at that, at a small bite, our improvement for that segment's north of $700 million. And I think you heard Dr. Smoot share that the entire Commonwealth's smart scale for a 2-year cycle is about 800 million. So the magnitude of cost of projects of that scale they outpace what can be achieved through our smart scale process, and are going to require something a lot more creative, alternative funding mechanisms and things that are similar to what we've done with Interstate 81, or, as Dr. Smoot said, some significant federal transportation bill that may, move the digits on the math that we have today. So hope that offers some clarity as to how the initiative to improve 220 is still there, but it certainly is not a part of the I-73 discussion.
Thank you both. Very helpful.
Thanks. We appreciate that. Okay. We will go to agenda item number 5 now and ask Mr. Eddie Wills if he would share with us an update on regional study on transportation project prioritization, economic development and growth. Eddie, if you're on there, it's all yours.
I'm on. Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. Just wanted to give everybody a very quick update on where we are with our work with the local economic development stakeholders, I guess. As you know, the TPO and TTC asked us to look at updating the TED study that was done a couple of years ago. We're trying to sort of refocus that and make it, economic development and transportation related projects. We've had 2 meetings so far. We've got a committee together with local economic development staff, representatives from chambers of commerce, tourism, local business community, business sectors that are impacted pretty strongly by transportation issues. Our first meeting was in October. We sort of introduced them to the long range transportation process, sort of went over the difference between a problem and a project and a need and things like that, sort of what Christina covered in part of her presentation earlier. Our December 3rd meeting, we looked at some of the results from an online survey that we did of the businesses. We also talked some more about how to classify some of the problems that they're identifying. We had discussions about, are the needs regional? Are they national? Are we just looking at local needs? Are some of those needs actually crossing those lines where where a regional project would actually benefit the individual localities? So we're still really early in the process of talking with the economic development folks and the business community on this. Last week's meeting, the December 3rd meeting, was a little bit short for everyone, considering the number of people we had on the call. It was only an hour-long meeting. So next week, we've arranged to have some one-on-one meetings with the economic developers and some of the business community folks. I think we have 7 or 8 Zoom meetings next week scheduled. So Christina and I will be talking with them on an individual basis so they can go into a little bit more detail and describe what their transportation problems are related to economic development, whatever that might be, whether that's highway, airport, rail, freight, regional, local, all of that. So we're going to be doing that with them next week. The problems that are identified are going to then be sent to the TTC for their consideration. Feel that they're probably more familiar with the solutions that can be offered. We want the problems to be addressed, that can have, I guess, reasonable solutions, things that can actually be built, things that can be done, and the TTC is going to get that part of it. I guess the next stage will be, those will be incorporated into the long range transportation plan process. TPO will see those problems and do the actual prioritization. We're not going to do that at our stage. We're just collecting the information from the economic developers and the business sector. TTC, TPO will make decisions about what actually moves forward as far as going into the long range plan. We also gave a sort of a brief update to the Roanoke Valley Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy Committee. Those of you that are familiar with the SEDS will know that that's sort of our Economic Development Administration plan for the region. A lot of the projects in the SEDS document right now, probably over 50% of them are transportation related. So we want to keep that group sort of up to date and sort of looped in with the process as the long range transportation plan moves forward. That's really all we have right now. I'm sure we'll come back in a couple of months with some more results and hopefully a good list of problems that have been identified for the TTC and the TPO to address and consider.
Thank you, Eddie. Is there anyone that has any questions for Eddie or any comments they'd like to make about his report or presentation?
Less than a month ago. They're seeing compliance rates of about 90%.
Yes, somebody's got, I'll take this one. Okay, if not, then we will go to agenda item number 6, which is other business. Do we have any other business, Mr. Strickland, that you know of?
No, sir.
Anybody in the meeting have any other business they'd like to bring up?
Mr. Chairman, I think there was one point that Mr. Osborne brought up that we didn't address, and that's that issue of the intermodal facility that was proposed a few years back for the Elliston area. And, you know, VDOT built a really nice road to connect it to Interstate 81. If you've never been down there, is it the best exit road you've ever seen off an interstate? But Norfolk Southern never acted on it. And as far as I know, Norfolk Southern still owns that property, at least 60, 70% of the total amount they were going to use for an intermodal facility and a freight facility. And so right now it's just there. And I remember Secretary Valentine said she was going to talk with the leadership of Norfolk Southern and see if she could get that dialogue going or see what Norfolk Southern wanted to do. But back 2 or 3 years ago, Norfolk Southern explained to us that they weren't going to make a decision until after the reorganization that Norfolk Southern was undergoing and some other decisions that the leadership of Norfolk Southern was making, and that we wouldn't know until after 2020. So maybe, I don't know, maybe in the next year or so, we may hear something from Norfolk Southern about what they intend to do. I know that Montgomery County would like, if they don't want to build an intermodal facility, Montgomery County would like to purchase that as a industrial business park since it's got great access now. So that's where we are now.
Didn't the locality up there sue the Norfolk Southern up for that?
No, sir. They sued the state because the state was in the process of using state money to, I guess, support Norfolk Southern, support that intermodal facility, and they lost. But the fellow who was the former chair, the board of supervisors representative, he's passed away. I think Mr. Fidgelowski, who's now the chairman in Montgomery County, it tells me that the people in that area have a little different perspective now about having that intermodal facility in place. So,
okay, well, thank you. Is there any other business? If not, we'll go to item 7, which is comment period by our policy board members and or the public. Is there anyone in the meeting that has any comments that they would like to bring up at this time?
Just one comment, Mr. Chair. What Dr. Smoot shared with us about the reducing carbon consequences if Virginia becomes a signatory is very concerning. I don't think anyone on this call wants to pay 34 cents more in sales tax for gasoline, especially in our rural areas around the state. And with that in mind, I think that we should keep that on our radar in case the commission wishes to take a resolution position on that going forward.
I was going to say maybe we should prepare a resolution to be ready for that, to send it up in case they pursue this any further. I don't know. What do you think, Wayne?
Mr. Chairman, the staff can certainly prepare a resolution for consideration. The General Assembly, I guess, starts around mid-January. And our next meeting to pass a resolution would be like a week and a half after that. So we could have something ready if we see there is movement on that.
Good. Well, thank you. Okay, any further comments? If not, I will say Merry Christmas to everyone in case we don't see you again for Christmas, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Mr. North made a motion.
Second,
Who made the second?
Bradford.
Radford. Okay, Mr. Radford. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Okay. Thank you all for being in the meeting today. And again, hope you have a good time.
Yes, ma'am. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Thank you.
See you next year.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
See you next year.
Yeah. Bill Bestis, did you have something? Was that your hand up or just waving?
He was just waving, Mr. Chairman, I believe.
Oh, okay. Well, good. Well, we'll see some of you back at 3:00 for the commission meeting. And I hope you all do have a great holiday and a really wonderful Christmas.
Thank you.
Okay.